Everyone thinks we have lots of data. We have lots of unstructured documentation, very, very little structured data. That's the unlock. The informed discussions about AI are no longer about, will I lose my job, won't I lose my job? It is about, how am I using it in a way that's useful to me, that I can show my colleagues, and we can make a meaningful difference with it.
You either believe that at this stage in AI adoption, it's going to make or break your career. And if you believe that, you are going to be at the forefront of driving this change.
You still need people in a people-driven business. What do you do with the extra bandwidth? And for those that make the most of that bandwidth, they're the ones that are going to really win. How do I know what I can trust? What I love about Ellie is that you do pull up that documentation and you show evidence. I don't think it's ever too late to get started. Don't wait, just get going.
Welcome to another episode of Bricks, Bytes, and Bold Moves, the future of real estate. Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. Kate Jarvis, the CEO and co-founder of Fifth Dimension. And I'm here today with James Pellatt, who has made his name doing a great many things at the intersection of real estate and technology, bringing buildings information modeling to Great Portland Estates, and now running digital trees, helping, let's say, old school businesses transform into the next decade's nay century. And so we're here today to talk about your career, things you've learned, things that I hope our audience here can benefit from in driving change in this new Gen AI first era.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Amazing. I'm tempted to start at the end and work backwards. I was thinking earlier today, let's take this AI thing to its logical conclusion. What happens to BIM?
Wow. Oh, wow. Wow. So what happens to it, to its logical conclusion? I hope, this is my kind of key optimism, is that the ability for those architects, engineers, cost consultants who are investing in their data now, their IP, I think that BIM, you can learn to optimize the many different forms of a building, like height, shape, form. And you can do that partly in small chunks at the moment. You can sort of do the height and mass of a building, but you can't do the content, or you can't work out the cost, or you can't work out the carbon impact. And what I hope, and what I'm really optimistic about or excited about, is actually the ability to optimize buildings in a design stage with a design team, so that clients can reach the point. So to take a building from inception through to making a planning application is somewhere around 12 months. That can obviously be shortened. Now, I'm not saying that you can do it in a month, but I think that if you can iterate much earlier, much more quickly, to discard options, it allows all of the team to become much more efficient about what they build. And then once you've got through planning, I think being able to amass information or assess it more quickly using LLMs like yours, I think would be a really powerful tool. But also the exciting thing is the ability, and there are some of our clients are new gen developers. But if you imagine that point of, instead of a public consultation just being a people turning up to a porta cabin and sticking stickers on things and not really trusting developers, because not many of them are that trustworthy, but you can actually engage, and you could allow communities to engage with that optimization too, because I think it's quite hard for people to understand and see it. It is so exciting that I do think this is, for me, is one of the end games. If you can shorten the design period, then you're going to make development significantly less expensive and allow architects, builders do exactly what they're good at, rather than this horrible Irish word we've got, is stramash, of trying to put things together and balance risk, and it doesn't work and it's not working. So to me, it's the thing that really gets me excited about the future. So yeah, that was a great starting question, because that's kind of my driving point for the moment.
Yeah, that's useful framing. Sounds like the opportunity to shorten that time to delivery also creates other opportunities, as you're saying, like an ability to be responsive to community feedback and to build with the community rather than have, let's say, a fraught relationship with it.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think, I mean, that may be a bit idealistic, but it's kind of what everybody wants, really. A responsible developer will know that you're trying to grow something. You are trying to make something last. And a couple of our clients are doing that at the moment, that they really engage in that piece. And I think the public gets to smell that, you're authentic or you're not, right? And so, and whilst AI may feel like it's a scary thing and it's taking away skill, I think quite the opposite. I think right now spreadsheets kill design because people's imagination is so sort of stuck in a model that this is what is profitable and this is what works. And at the moment, nothing's profitable and nothing works. So I won't use my imagination to think of something that might. And that's if anything else, the excitement about AI for me is creating bandwidth for people to do more with.
I hear a lot of excitement and curiosity, passion in your voice. So that makes me want to go back to a young James.
Okay.
What got you into this in the first place?
I was lucky. I was always wanting to, whatever I did in life, I wanted to leave something. I felt like the time on the planet is precious and I wanted to leave something behind. And although I love music and I love art and I love reading, I am no good at any of those things at all. So I wasn't going to make a record but I did. Shaping buildings and shaping the environment around me was always something that I knew that I wanted to work in that sector. And so I've been really fortunate. I've never struggled to think, am I doing the right thing? I've always enjoyed it. And that's what attracted me to it.
So does it annoy you that people have sort of woken up to the idea that technology is important in real estate nowadays since you've been hip to it for decades? Or are you happy to ride the hype cycle?
No, I'm happy to take whichever hype cycle comes down the street. I'm jaded enough to know. I've sat through so many false dawns that I'm wise enough now to know that each one may not deliver exactly what I hope it would deliver. But I'm also confident that each one brings you closer to what could be delivered.
So take me back to your days working at Great Portland.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, there's the story of how you were driving change in that environment. And then the reality of it might have been a bit messier, a bit more laborious, and a bit more political. So I guess I'm interested in both, right? You drove an amazing outcome, absolutely innovative, game-changing. Other people looked up to that model and tried to repeat it within their own businesses. But tell me about what that was like for you, how it started and how it went.
I think from quite early on, I always realized how inefficient real estate is. And I hated people repeating mistakes. I never wanted to I wanted to learn from lessons learned and for the industry to learn. But the culture is, the problem with real estate is nobody really understands what everybody else does. It's like a movie. You see the long list of credits at the end of a movie and you see a whole host of people that have been involved in it. Well, then building's the same thing. But not everybody understands what everybody else does. And that leads to blame. And the blame culture pervades everything throughout. I was lucky enough to work for an American developer called Tishman Speyer before GPE. And in 2007, I was in New York. They were building Yankee Stadium. And it was my first full-on BIM model. I've seen elements of 3D design before, but it was the first time that I saw it. And I remember turning to the head of HR, and this was in 2007, said, wow, this is going to make us all redundant. Because I was that optimistic that this was going to be the change. And it wasn't. And when I was lucky, when I joined GPE in 2011 as head of projects, it coincided with the UK government issuing something called the BIM mandate. And that said, by 2016, all government work will be procured using BIM. And that's what you've got to do. So it's one of the single most useful pieces of government policy that I think I've experienced in my career, and that it wasn't it was a long enough timescale that you could do something about so the industry could see it. There was a whole roadmap about how to do it, and but it wasn't a legislation that said you have to. It was kind of learn, and this is where you're going to get to. And so I just joined GPE, and we had a major development program, is coming out of the GFC, and all of a sudden there was this roadmap and this tool, and I could use it. So I had the ability to lead and to sort of instruct my team to say this is what we're going to do, and it was really interesting at the time, and it's sort of one of the early lessons about innovating in real estate. I started off thinking, of course everyone else is going to want to follow this, right? But nobody, that I was alone in that point. But I was suddenly somebody's new boss, and they'd go, okay, I've got to do this, but I don't really want to tell you no, and I don't really tell you why not. But I learned enough, like through empathy, just to go, hang on, I can sense you're all nervous about this. What is it you're worried about? And I said, look, let's just try it for 8 weeks. If it's a burden and it's going to get in the way, we'll all stop. And we didn't, and we learned and we adapted, and you sort of acknowledge people's fears. And then by the end of it, everybody in the project had bought into it, and we all acknowledge it was a building in Southwark called 240 Blackfriars, and it has a parabolic roof and it's very odd geometry. And we would never have built that. We would have been months late. So my very first project at GP, I'm convinced that would have ended up like within a 3-month delay, and would have reflected badly on me at that point. But I kind of knew that it didn't. And more importantly, the people in my team that were suspicious suddenly became huge advocates. And that advocacy is really the sweet spot that you need to get to with any tech adoption, to find the people who are, what are they scared about? What are they afraid of? And try and acknowledge that, but also give them some guardrails in which to work and test and adapt. And then once you do, the adoption becomes much easier.
Part of what I love about the work that both of us do is that you have to get deep into the psychology of change.
Yeah.
So, we start sounding like we have PhDs in psychology, and also that we spend a lot of time thinking about what people's motivations are and how those motivations fit in within the context of your business, within the context of different macroeconomic constraints, et cetera. And so I'm wondering, I'm always seeking that aha moment. Right? That's what takes someone from being reluctant to being an advocate, as you say.
Yeah.
What was the aha moment, do you think, at GPE, or was it a series of them?
I think it was a series of them. I think it was, we were so busy. There was a lot going on. We did a development called Rathbone Square, and it was our first residential development that we did. And we could see lots of other developers in the area that were doing similar schemes, and they were 12, 18 months behind program, and we clearly didn't want to do that. So we were very thoughtful about what are the lessons we've learned from looking at everybody else. And we learned that changing your mind and not making a decision was like the bit that was always going to trip everything up. And we built a replica of the apartments, and we also learned, and we thought, well, okay, the workers who are coming to site, they're not here for the whole 18 months. They're here for a week. They're just, labour within London is very transitory. So we recorded, whilst we were making this mock-up, we made little YouTube shorts, right, of this is what I found when I installed this in the ceiling. So next time you do this. And so we had little QR codes and readers, which would be reels. And you would look at it and you go, okay, I know what to do and I know how to avoid that mistake. And what you were getting to at that point was thinking through what is the process that someone's going through and how can I make it easier? How can I remove the friction? And if you get to that point, then it's really key to success. And we only issued 4 changes on that project. And 2 of those change orders were for an ice cream van because it was too hot on certain days. So we were only 3 weeks late at the end. And that was unheard of, right? That was the key moment in which everyone else is like literally months behind. We delivered it to the right quality at the right time. And that was sort of the culmination of thinking through the whole process.
So it sounds like you clocked really early that you had to make it real for people.
Yeah.
You had to give them the experience of what it was like to identify something in the moment based on access to new data
Yeah.
they wouldn't have been able to access before. And not, in theory, right? Not a demo, not someone else's data,
Yeah.
not a model, but literally the building that you were working on
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. And that was another instinctive thing, is that you realize people have got no imagination. So once you acknowledge that fact, you asked the question about digital transformation. It was kind of easier to use BIM, and it was kind of easier to do show and tell because you could get to the product quicker. Trying to persuade to invest in data and data lake was so hard. That was a real challenge because it was like this virtual thing, like cloud. And what is this data warehouse then? It's like a 3D Excel spreadsheet that can constantly grow and evolve, and that in each cube you've got a number, and that number is everything, right? So that's and I know both of that's structured data, but I might as well have been talking about putting cheese on my head, and it was gonna it was unlocking data was probably the hardest point in my own career and my own journey. And I had to go back. I had to study. I had to understand what cloud was. I had to understand what this thing called a data lake was, data warehouse. What does it mean? I always understood that if I had information, I could work on it, but I couldn't understand if I've got data from air quality sensors over here and I've got lease data over here, how do I make those two come together? And it was so hard for me to understand, but that relentless curiosity was the aha moment for me. And then you have to learn exactly the point, the persuasion point, how do you get people to recognize that? And in real estate, like, you must get this all the time, the difference between a document and data. Everyone thinks we have lots of data. We have lots of unstructured documentation. We have very little data, very, very little structured data. And that, if there's anything sort of that drives me, it is that point to get people to understand that, because that's the unlock. Once you get people to get it and they can see, oh, if I put this all in one place and then I can access it, which is the easiest thing in the world, then it becomes real for them. And that was definitely way harder. That took some time to persuade my bosses at GPE to invest in that, but thank goodness they did, because it was the unlock.
Yeah, I think for me, I talk a lot about information, which is concrete. So in the model you're talking about, it could be documents, it could be video, it could be a floor plan, but it's a thing that exists in the real world. You can touch it. Even if we're talking about digital paper, we're not so far from, and in many businesses there still are, even very recent cash-rich developers will show me their file folders, right?
Yeah.
So the association or the analogy is quite easy.
Yeah.
But when you move from information to data, data is abstract.
Yeah.
Data is an idea that, as you say, is increasingly abstract because of the advent of the internet, how data are stored. They're not associated with individual machines.
Sure.
It's some sort of three-dimensional or more universe in which you collect lots of different bits of information, derive insights from them, hopefully with the advent of GenAI native products, faster and better insights. But I think that is a leap for especially people who have been buying and selling products in the same way for many years and doing so quite successfully. Yeah.
Yeah, because the truth is, to make money in real estate, you don't need to do any of it. You don't. You and I can't, and it's why real estate has been the last sector, I think, to embrace technology, because there's no ROI, there's no quicker turnaround. So if I'm making a widget, even if I'm in the production of the widget, that measuring productivity is beneficial to your profitability. That doesn't apply to real estate. And I've learned to accept that. And it's probably the thing that keeps me awake at night, because nobody has to do this. It is a melting platform, not a burning platform, right? It is that point. But when you realize that, what we do at Digital Trees, we engage with businesses and we measure how much time people spend reporting. Like gathering information to writing the report, or preparing it, or waiting for other people to give them information. And it is about 20 to 30% on average across the business that their time is spent doing that. And when you point out that there's now this tool that if you imagine you've organized that information, that means that you still need intelligent input, but you can use it in a way that's much quicker and much easier to get you to 80% of the answer, but still use your opinion. What are you going to do with the extra bandwidth? What do you do with that extra day a week you're giving back to your staff? And when you're saying things like, well, you're focused on your customers, or can they do 2 more visits to tenants during the week? Can you listen to what they're saying? That's the compelling argument now, is that you're adding value. You're going to increase retention or minimize void, or whatever the metric is that you've got to get to, by using your data in an organized way.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've been thinking about a level of this challenge, which is that companies like Tishman Speyer are actually a really good example, where they were some of the first to adopt buildings and facilities management technology that put data at the core of their business.
Yeah.
They are currently some of the last to adopt some of the back office optimization and GenAI native platforms that other businesses have been quicker to sort of grab onto. And I think it's precisely this sort of framing of, okay, but we understand real world assets, and we understand what makes real world assets be delivering an extra 40 basis points as part of a larger portfolio over time, and I manage that in a spreadsheet. What reason do I have to change? And so then, rather than it being one step to a clear ROI, it's maybe 2, it's maybe 3, back to something like reducing vacancies, re-architecting your cap stack because you realize that it's not an ideal balance of equity and debt. You see that all over the place right now with interest rates changing. But these feel like, and I don't think that they are in the long term, but in the short term, they feel like optimizations that you can deprioritize. And so then you have to sit down with someone and say, okay, but what about in 2 years, in 3 years, in 5 years? If you do not do this today, where do you think you will be versus other players in the space who started today?
Yeah, exactly that. So, and that was a compelling argument I could put to GPE. And they did accept that point, saying it may not be immediately obvious in year 1. It should be obvious by year 3, and it will definitely by year 5. Right? You'll have this wealth of structured data that you can draw upon that's going to allow you to inform and make better decisions as you move forwards. And one of my clients, Bywater Properties, that is exactly what they do. That's what they're doing. They're investing in this now because they know you get organized first and it will help reporting. But they know that the investment in 3 and 5 years' time is where this will really help pay off and give you different insight. And I think you and I probably share the same views, like what's holding people back, right? Because you'll sort of get to the point you'll never get these years back. You might be able to review backwards some information, but it's not going to be as good as having something that you can really organize and really find the use cases that you want to measure going forwards. And nothing will beat that point, I don't think.
Yeah, I'm interested what you think of this. My spicy take is that it's ego. You either believe that at this stage in AI adoption, it's going to make or break your career. And if you believe that, you are going to be at the forefront of driving this change. If you do not believe that, for whatever reason, you're close enough to retirement, you're really early in your own career, and so yes, AI is naturally going to become a part of the work that you do. You have to learn how to use it, but you're already an average ChatGPT user, et cetera. You're sort of like going to be part of it, a generation for which it's native. If you're one of those types of people, why care, right? There's a generation directly in the middle of those, right, where you still have another good 10, 20 plus years of your career. Some part of your mind is very aware, whether it's a fear-based reaction or an excitement one, that this is going to change the way that you work. And so you better start doing something about it now. And then I think I try and harness that energy, and that becomes the advocacy within organizations that have a lot of other people with a lot of different priorities.
I think that's a very good point. I don't think it's necessarily an age thing, because I can think of examples of people at different stages in their career who are as enthusiastic about this or as pessimistic about it. So I've certainly heard people, like I've heard examples of anybody who uses any kind of LLM to read a document is cheating. Really? Wow. Are they? They're not cheating.
Did you use a calculator or an abacus?
Yeah.
I'm really curious. An abacus would still be cheating in that scenario, right?
Exactly. But they're not, I don't think just that they're cheating. Well, clearly I don't think they're cheating. I think it's more that I think you're right to be skeptical about hallucinations. That's fair enough. Okay. If that's really what you're saying is, how do I know what I can trust? And what I love about Ellie is that you do pull up that documentation and you show evidence for it. I think it's like one of the best bits of you. It's not like Claude or Anthropic or anything that I attach a file. I kind of hope it's read it and I'm still going to get something out of it. Whereas Ellie says, you ask it the question, it comes back, and there it is, and that's where it's come from. So
I was taught to show my work in school, James.
Well,
so I feel like, as an inherently skeptical person, just in general.
But I think it's really important in building trust.
Yep.
So that once I know, I would guess, and I'd love to hear your input, the more that people use Ellie, the more they're getting used to that I no longer have to see what's there, because you instinctively do trust it more, right? You're going to find that stuff. But to me, it was a key part of your UX that I thought, as soon as I could, it was easy for me to sell it to other people. So the fear factor is there. I still like it. We're nowhere near mass adoption within real estate. And the BPF survey, and I knew there's one due to come out, but like most people said, well, it'll have an effect in 2 to 3 years' time, which was classic real estate. I'm too busy, I'm too stressed, don't talk to me about it, I can put it off for now. And yet the smart companies and the smart clients are the ones who are going, oh, okay, there's something in it, this does feel like it's real, this does feel like that, November 22 was the moment in which I could see this stuff happening. Oh, okay, I now feel like everything I could ignore about machine learning before that point, I didn't have to worry about it. But now I can see this doing something. And so what's interesting to me is that I think that the informed discussions about AI are no longer about, will I lose my job, won't I lose my job? It is about how am I using it in a way that's useful to me, that I can show my colleagues and we can make a meaningful difference with.
Yeah, I think a national level investment in AI would show pretty clearly that people think it's an economic boon, both at the individual sort of business level and the general workforce level, right?
Yeah.
And so I agree, and it's been nice over the past 18 months, right? We started Fifth Dimension in Jan of 23, having built with that sort of early stages of training various LLMs as they were coming about. And it was really hard for a while to have any type of popular conversation about the adoption of Gen AI native products that wasn't like the reaction that you had when you first saw that BIM model at Yankee Stadium, which is the logical conclusion of this, that all knowledge workers are just out of a job.
Yeah.
And the kind of hysteria that results from that, which, as you say, is distracting from the incredibly interesting questions of how will my life be different? How will my business be different? And if I am either forced or interested in proactively changing the commercial model of my business, why don't I workshop that today, right?
Yeah.
My board's going to ask me what I'm doing about this.
Yeah.
Do I take that as a serious directive, or do I take that as I, came up with pillars that are transparency and, cloud access to data, et cetera, and then I call it a day until 3 years from now?
Yeah. Because it looked like I answered that question from my board. It looked like I was doing something, and we were worried that our company data was being leaked. We had to have policies to stop stuff. It was partly because, like, what was the market doing at the same time, right? So it was at the peak of interest rates rising, yields were drifting out. So the economic reality for real estate companies was that you've been drunk on low interest rates for a decade, right? We've all got lazy. We've all been able to access cheap capital, we just hire more people or hire another analyst to do this stuff. And that's what you did. That's kind of what, and
it's what startups did too.
Yeah,
uncoincidentally.
That's true. Everybody became bloated for the same reason.
Yep.
Didn't look at efficiency. And it's really interesting that the timing at that point made it harder than ever for someone to justify some expenditure, because whatever you were spending money on was you were taking away from real estate. And we met in New York in November, didn't we? But I remember at that table, the CTOs, and these are the fact that most real estate companies have a CTO is a big difference between the US and the UK. But they were all privately complaining that the real estate companies would spend $600,000 on a lobby, on some marble from Italy for a lobby, but they wouldn't spend money on technology, which was going to drive, the ROI would be significantly greater. And it still comes back to that point of understanding, right? What is the C-suite's level of understanding about this technology, and what does it actually really mean? And that's the missing piece, because there's no leadership. Without it, you have pockets of enthusiasm, but you don't have leadership. And without leadership, I don't think any innovation really flies.
Well, you can't host your board chair in a data lake, I suppose, without VR technology. So I think there is something about real estate still being a highly people-driven business, and one having to propose that this adoption of technology is in service of it being an even more, as you said, I think, empathetic earlier, a more empathetic industry.
Yeah, because you have to. All real estate comes to you. How much time do people want to spend in that space? And there are a few exclusive parts in the world when you want as few people in that space and you charge a ridiculous premium for it. But generally, you want as many people to want to be there, and they'll pay more for being there. That's what all real estate comes down to. So you're trying to understand the psychology of people, and what better way of doing it is listening to people. That's really good. But also measuring that data, right? Combining how many people are using this space compared to weather and all of the other variables that go into that point. And then what could I do? Did that event that I wanted to put on, that was we used to, at GPU, we used to open up the building weekends for Sunday school, or whatever group or community you wanted within the building. There was no ROI on that. There was nothing that said this will generate more money. But it felt like a good idea. But it was all of these things that feel like good ideas. An accountant or a finance team say, prove it. And the moment you say, is my gut feel that feels like this, it's really hard. And that's why most things get lost and stumble, I think. Because you can't prove that having independent retailers in the ground floor of your student housing block is going to be, accretive to the community and keeping people in that block or wanting to be there, but you instinctively feel like it is right. And there are very few sort of wild spirit entrepreneurs left in real estate that would do that would look at something in Brooklyn and go, yeah, do you know what? Williamsburg is a place for me to invest in 25 years ago, because I can see this is a place that one of the first people were doing, or like Derwent with the T building, like investing in Shoreditch at a time when, why would you? It didn't make any sense at all, but they were brave enough to do something. That's really lost and rare. And what I'm kind of hoping is not that this Gen AI, the bandwidth that it gives you, if you've got no imagination and you're stuck, you're not going to get, it doesn't make you a better developer. It could give you better insight if you choose to use it. But if you have that combination, I think that to me is really exciting, that you can combine that entrepreneurial spirit, and I've tested out the thesis and I can make a compelling case for doing this.
Yeah, I think as a lifelong data scientist, I myself have even banged on about correlation versus causation. But when you see all of the real estate businesses, let's say global asset managers that have the highest performance on their assets over the past 10 years are technology first businesses.
Yeah.
Sure, it's a correlation, but I have some instinctive sense, right, that it's one of a few things that they've chosen to do really well at, and that is driving their performance. And so it can be painful to say you might not see this return in the order of magnitude on your P&L in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. It's going to take a little while, but you're going to see elements of it, right? And I think this is why people grasp at operational efficiency metrics, workforce hours saved, and that can activate the whole everyone's taking my jobs argument.
Yeah.
But it's because we're trying to get to the place where, having made the investment 3 or 5 years later, it's quite easy to tie it to, we did this many more deals.
Yeah.
We made this many better decisions on the order of magnitude of tens of millions of pounds or dollars.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you can't get there without making a change first.
No, and I think the sort of big decisions that you decided in 2015 to invest in logistics or industrial was, sure, you could see online retailing or online shopping. So you might have felt that's a logical thing. That there's going to be more demand for these things. So let's move into that. Let's pivot into that. That was probably gut instinct. You wouldn't model that today. WeWork was kind of obvious as an example. That was some crazy entrepreneurial thing of responding to really drab, boring offices in New York real estate to making something different that you could see. And when you think back of what all of the commentary about WeWork was, everyone had an opinion on it because they could see it and they could look at it. Mm-hmm. And they could say why they didn't like it. Quietly, industrialists sit behind them. They have a grown-up product. They followed the same gut instinct, but not as noisily and not as much of a distraction. And they end up with a really good core product. And now everyone else is thinking through, how do I make that thing happen? Mm-hmm. And you're going from an income business to an operational business. And that's really hard work. Culturally, that's a big shift to get to. But you couldn't prove that you were going to make more money from it. And that analysis paralysis is what kills off that piece of imagination. And it's why some people still are struggling to respond to flexible working today.
Bringing together a couple different threads of conversation, I think I'm interested in how you think about generally in the space and how you advise clients on build versus buy.
Yeah.
Because some businesses are throwing money at building technology in-house. I know Nuveen has tons and tons of developers.
Yeah.
And in this case, I'm talking about software engineers, not the literal kind. And that goes well and poorly in some different degree. And most businesses, to be fair, that do invest in building their own technology stack, also invest in buying external suppliers, filling any gaps that they have that they haven't been able to build themselves. But I think that's a really tough one for a lot of, especially cash-rich real estate businesses who have some IP, some ego, caught up in the idea that they are always innovating. And this is part of the way in which they're always innovating.
Yeah. So I think my general advice is it depends on what your business plan is. What is it you're wanting to focus on anyway, first of all? So what direction are you wanting to go into? Then what are the problems that your team are facing? And then to think, okay, what are the solutions that are available in that point? But as a rule of thumb, I think whatever your IP is, you should build something that supports the protection of that IP. And you should never leak that. That should never go beyond your boundary. So you're going to have to do something. And it's between 15 and 25% of your tech stack you need to build using any kind of the 3-4 cloud options that you've got. That seems scary. That seems, why do I want to hire data teams that are coders that are going to be doing this stuff? Surely we can just buy something off the shelf. Because in the UK, it's actually the opposite. It's not that I want to build it; it's that I don't want to build it. Because ironically, I remember at one of the points of GPE that the board was saying that we don't trust technology projects. They're always late. They never deliver on time. They always blow budget, and they never work. And I said, well, look. Right now in Seattle and Silicon Valley, there are tech companies saying all real estate projects are late. They're never on time. They're never on budget, and they never work, right? The mistrust is kind of similar to both. And actually, what was striking to me was I'd learned project management through delivery of buildings, but then I sort of learned agile through delivery of technology. And there are definitely things you can learn, but they're processes, they're projects that you learn. And there are horror stories and there are things that go wrong in both instances, but there's also things that go incredibly well. So to answer your first question, I think that you should build somewhere around that point, and then, what is either the point-to-point solution that's going to give you useful structured data that's going to help contribute to your answer, and can I integrate that within my tech stack, or might I add that on if I need to? But I think there's enough that there's way too many point-to-point solutions out in the market. But this is the thing that I think unlocks that point to get you the answer that you want to understand. Because in the meantime, those point-to-point solutions will get merged, bought, and brought up with companies that I feel like, okay, you're going to give me 40% of my structured data. Here's what I'm going to buy from you. This is a SaaS product that I'm going to use from you. Give me this, and it works, right? So that's what kind of should happen, I think, that people would win along the way. So what I would kind of hope is in that 5-year period that you've got 20% your own, 20% partner or whatever, and then the rest you're buying from as few companies as you want. And if you talk to any new CTO that's coming into real estate, first of all, they're going, like, how do you work it? But that's kind of end game for them, because it is managing risk and you're able to respond. But we're a long way off that coming, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. At Fifth Dimension, we certainly envision an app marketplace within our system, such that whether you're using an API, whether it's single sign-on, whether it's a point solution that we've purchased, whether it's an IoT solution that we've purchased, right? So we at Legal in General, I've heard, have a ton of drone data that they've amassed over a long period of time and just haven't been able to look at.
Yeah.
What is the purpose of a Gen AI native platform if not to bring together, to sort of full circle the conversation, those little bits of built world information that can then contribute to high level, very financially impactful decisions like where to put that cafe, whether or not you should renew that lease over that one.
Yeah. And I think people are afraid that as soon as you start this, it expands either headcount or demands for data. But I think what they misunderstand is the requirement list, that if your team build up, as they get used to seeing stuff, get thinking, it would be really helpful if I could see this and this. And you either can do that quickly because you've got these feeds, or you can't and you need to find a gap. But once people learn that using any kind of business intelligence, that you're able to tweak this dashboard to give you the answer that you want it to give you, then they engage more, they learn to trust it, they use it in their day-to-day roles. And even better, you start to see those analysts that were brilliant at modeling Excel now going, oh, okay, I don't have to have this ridiculously cumbersome Excel spreadsheet that I can't run, that's falling down because it's too complicated. I have learned SQL. I've learned the input. I can use Python for coding. I'm still doing what I'm doing, but I'm doing it in a much more efficient way. And I'm still using my skills to say, here's this investment, this development, whatever it is, works, but I'm not doing it in this cumbersome way that I was doing it before. I mean, again, we're a long way off that coming, but it's a good point. When you talk about the younger generation, I've definitely seen people in their 20s and 30s are coming into their careers suddenly thinking, oh, wow, this can really unlock for me. This gets me to what I want it to be. And you can see the excitement in their eyes. And they don't mind learning some new skill, because they realize that it's just another part of using a spreadsheet that they learned before. I mean, modeling in itself is such a ridiculous dark art. It's like one of those things that people like it to be complicated because very few people can therefore think that they can do it. When the reality, the inputs, maybe a dozen inputs which affect the outcomes, but it's just presented in this really complicated way, and you can't necessarily get to where you want to find it. And it's a shame, really, because it's not as complicated as I think people like to make it.
Yeah. Much like how technologists like to use a bunch of acronyms and words people don't understand for really simple technologies.
Yeah.
So,
and boiling it down to its simplest form is the key, right?
Yeah, I really like the analogy with agile and development management or other sorts of project management, because I think to the point of buy versus build, and in general, how the journey of digital transformation in real estate businesses can go awry. There's just a bunch of what I would call product or vision drift, right? If you're not familiar with why you're building the technology, and I'm sure this is one thing I really like about your business is you force people to ask questions. What are you really doing here? What is the purpose of this? How does it serve those strategic goals that tie back to your P&L? If you do not only have answers to those questions, but repeat them every single meeting where you're project managing a technology project, of course it's going to go off-piste. It's no different, right? So, oh, great, we wanted to order marble that's 10x more expensive. Well, does that actually serve the purpose of why we are developing this property? If it does, that's an acceptable expense and an acceptable setback in delivery timelines. If it doesn't, don't do it, right? And the same applies to any technical project or digital transformation project. And so I can see how most people get caught up in just not defining their terms at the outset and figuring out what they care about.
And that's the essence of why you're doing it is so important to keep remembering, because it's so easy to get carried away. And I found some clients, the digital teams get frustrated with the real estate teams because they're wanting to come up with an answer, but there is this language barrier between the two groups that don't fully understand it. And the moment that you have some ideation or a hackathon or whatever it is to get to that point, and again, people in real estate don't really understand what a hackathon is. And it sounds like it's this weird thing, but essentially
the dark web.
It's the dark web.
It's the people trying to steal your data.
But when you're saying, how can we solve a problem quickly?
Yes. It's just a brainstorming session, everyone. And you try and make something during the brainstorming session rather than just talk about it.
And you see something come out at the end. And what, you mean you can do this? This is the way? That bit is, those are the things that I've taken from the tech world that I can apply to the real estate world. They're much more relevant for people to understand.
So if you had a crystal ball, what do you think the next, let's say 10 years, that's an ambitious enough timeline, are going to look like in terms of what work in the client base, let's say, that you have today, the types of real estate businesses we think of today, developers, owner-operators, et cetera, governance, the actual day-to-day tasks, how will they change?
I think that in that piece, that you will the unlock that real estate will give, that technology will give real estate, and Gen AI will get to the point. If you're the last to get to that point, you're going to be forced into that point anyway, and you're going to have to make those changes. But there will be enough examples of people that have shown an advantage of where they get to, but they will get to the advantage because you will start to think about your process. Any kind of process mapping is really hard for real estate companies to do. And we had it recently with Bywater. We did a whole process map that we were in the room, and the leaders sat there and they went, wow, imagine what we could do then if we really work on refining this process. And it's not actually a technology project that we're doing. It is, but it is more a mindset of going, oh, we could be so much more better at what we do, and we can have a better outcome if we constantly rethink that way of doing what we're doing. You're all great people in this room. The team, we believe in you. We want to give you the best capacity to do what you can do, but we don't want to keep repeating the mistakes. And it was the thing that sort of, going back at the beginning of my career, it was such an exciting moment for me to be in a room and hear a client say that, because it was, you can see, right, now I can get it. So 10 years time, I kind of hope that processes are refined, and that the waste, the sort of the pieces that occur in between real estate are hard. The bits that won't go away, I don't think, are I'm still going to need an architect to design a building. I'm still going to need a builder to build it. I'm still going to need people to manage it. I think you still need people in a people-driven business. But it's how much better, what do you do with the extra bandwidth? And for those that make the most of that bandwidth, they're the ones that are going to really win.
One thing I like to think about is we talk about digital twins, right? In the Gen AI native world. I think really it's more like a mirror. And the thing is, people don't always like their own reflections. But when you start building a truly digitally native business, you break down data silos, you allow for the mapping of workflows, you allow for Gen AI native applications to help optimize some of those workflows and the many other solutions that can exist. You optimize your supply chain, all of these things. What it does is surface the really ugly bits about the way you're currently operating your business. Yeah. And I think, frankly, some people simply aren't ready to do that. And that's part of the resistance, whether they consciously know it or not. Don't take my pretty Excel model away from me. I'm the only one who knows how it works, to an earlier point. And what if it doesn't actually work? And what if actually breaking down some of these data silos means that it becomes apparent to other people that it doesn't work 5 out of 10 times? Yeah. That's pretty scary. But there's, I think, again, like a kind of person who finds that nothing but exciting. Yeah. Like, why wouldn't I want to know? Yeah. That's going to jet set me into the future in my career, in my business. I'm going to finally beat those competitors that have been champing at the bit to beat me all these years. But I think there's also an attitude that's a bit like, but it doesn't appear broken right now. Yeah. So why do I want to look at something terrible?
Going back to that film analogy, you feel like you've seen a new building, so it works, but it doesn't work and it's not working. In fact, it's probably become something that could be sustainable to probably the least sustainable it's ever going to be at that moment in time, because they don't understand how inefficient running a building is and the energy you use, because you're not capturing that data. And it kind of it was right when I handed it over. Well, buildings are living, the fabric isn't living, but how people use them is constantly evolving. And unless you're measuring that, and I don't mean tracking each individual people, because I don't care about that, but broadly, how much is being consumed by how many people at what time, those are the variables that you're going to kind of need. And the more you're doing that, you're constantly improving. And that's where all of a sudden, you can process this vast amount of confusing and conflicting information that you didn't want to look at before. Like constantly, boards that I would advise would say, that's nonsense. What do you mean? What do you mean that shouldn't happen? Or they assumed that BIM was generative AI. The architects just push a button, don't they? And this is what happens. No, they click from here to here. They've never really looked at the process because they haven't had to. And you're right, it's showing up the sort of ugliness. But I think you're getting a new generation of leadership coming through that have experienced enough of the ugliness to think, we shouldn't do this way.
I like to think of analogies and parallels, of course, in the venture-backed startup and scale-up world, because that's native to me. Yeah. And I think a lot about this kind of founder mode movement that's been talked about a lot, for better and for worse. But I think what's right about it is the insight that most people running businesses do not understand their own businesses. Yeah. Which means there's something broken about whether it's digital products, a building, anything about the way we build and manage products and services. Yeah. There was a time at which, right, it would have been entirely unacceptable for you to be running an assembly line at Ford and to have never walked the floor. Yeah. Can you imagine? Yeah. And yet there are CEOs of businesses that have raised hundreds of millions who have no idea what their product actually does today.
No. And equally at that point, the Peter principle is alive and well, right? So the way they think that they're going to look at the factory floor is hire an ex-factory worker who sees where all the shortcuts were made, and they're this big aggressive person that get it done, when actually they're not. They're not remotely qualified to actually think of Kaizen or improvements, like how do I improve what I'm doing? And that's what I love about that thought. Like if I can get to continuous improvement, because this was the pivotal moment in my career, was going to look at a Jaguar car factory and assuming that the cars were made as efficiently as they could be made, and realizing they actually weren't. And it took them about 18 months or 2 years to get to the perfect car. And that wasn't a slight on Jaguar. That's just, as you look into it, that's what Toyota and everybody got to, because they realized that humans sort of need to get into that process to get better. That's the exciting thing. Like if you get to Kaizen, if this data gives you the Kaizen to improve what you're doing, that's the win.
I like that vision of the future. Is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with, one takeaway that you think everyone, if they do one thing this week, what would you advise them to do?
The key thing is it's really confusing that you see these new models, that there's this power, there's DeepSeek, there's all these new things that are happening all the time. And it feels like, oh, I don't know where to get started or what to do. I don't think it's ever too late to get started. It is fine to say, I will try this. The more important thing is to allow yourself 15 minutes, give focus time of just trying out something. You talked about it in your last podcast, right? It is the thing that I will start to learn to use. I don't know what the benefit is going to be. I'll start to use Notebook LM or whatever that thing is, and you'll learn to work out how it works in your workflow. The best thing is just to get started, because it isn't scary. No one's going to kind of show you this answer. But the smart people work out, okay, I can do this. Now I can do that. Now I can do the other. Don't wait. Just get going.
I think that's the best possible advice, to be honest. And I like to think about it in terms of play, because with things we're familiar with, right? You have a taste in music.
Yeah.
You know what music you like and what music you don't like. There was a time when that wasn't true. And I think most people today, they don't know what their taste is in Gen AI native products.
No.
They don't know what they like, what they don't like, what the possibilities are, whether they want, more cowbell or less cowbell.
Yeah.
But you're never going to get there without trying.
No.
And so I encourage people to adopt that kind of childlike mindset of, maybe this will be 15 minutes that I never get back, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But something interesting will happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I very rarely feel like I've wasted that time. So get going.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's good to have you on the podcast, and I look forward to seeing what you do next.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Likewise.
Cheers.